My son's coffin was in front of me, but all I could see was the empty chair where his wife should have been. The church was filled with flowers and whispers. I stood in a black suit at the pulpit, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles burned white. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow me, not just in grief but in silent judgment. Richard's wife hadn't shown up. Everyone noticed. I cleared my throat, forcing the words past the knot in it. My son, Richard, I began, my voice breaking, was only 34, too young, too full of life to be taken so soon. He was kind, hard-working, the type of man who gave more than he ever asked for. I paused, searching for the strength to continue. My eyes blurred with tears, but the empty seat stayed sharp in my vision like a wound that refused to close. From the pews I heard the faint hiss of whispers. "She didn't even show up?" someone murmured. Another voice. "What kind of wife does that?" I swallowed hard, fighting to steady myself. My words came slower, each one heavier. He loved deeply. He deserved to be loved in return. When I finished, silence fell. Then the organ began again, low and mournful, and I stepped down from the pulpit, my body trembling from the effort of holding myself together. At the graveside I stood alone as they lowered the casket into the earth. My hand clenched the handful of dirt, and when I let it fall, it landed with a hollow thud against the lid. That sound echoed inside me. Afterward, the reception blurred together. Sympathetic faces, murmured condolences, pats on the back I didn't feel. But Olivia's absence was louder than any of their words. A neighbor approached, her eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Then she hesitated. "But where's Olivia?" I forced my voice to stay steady. "She didn't come." The neighbor looked away quickly, shame written all over her face. She didn't need to say more. The silence said it all. Hours later, when the guests had gone and the house was still, I sat alone at the dining table. My phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting another message of condolence. Instead, I froze. There on the screen was a picture of Olivia. She was in Cancun, standing on a beach, a drink in her hand, sunglasses hiding her eyes. At her side was Miguel, our gardener. The caption under the photo cut into me like a blade. "New beginnings." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. My chest felt hollow, my grief curdling into something darker. While I had thrown dirt on my son's coffin, his wife was clinking glasses with another man, smiling like she had never known sorrow. I whispered to myself, how could she? The anger surged hot and sudden. For years I had treated Olivia like family. I had welcomed her, defended her, trusted her, and when my son's life ended, she couldn't even honor him with her presence. Instead, she celebrated. I scrolled further, each new post more careless, more cruel. Pictures of beaches, drinks, laughter. Not a single word about Richard. Not even a mention. My hand shook as I set the phone down. I wanted to smash it, to stop the images from searing themselves into my mind. But before I could act, another buzz came. A new message. I glanced at the screen, and my heart stopped. It wasn't from a neighbor, or a relative, or a friend. It was from Richard's phone. The text read, "Dad, come to my house now." My breath caught in my throat. My son was supposed to be buried in the ground, and yet here was his voice reaching for me. The phone slipped in my hand as a chill ran through me. Grief, anger, confusion, all of it tangled into one unbearable knot. I whispered the words aloud, as if saying them would make sense of them. Dead men don't text. But my son had, and in that moment, I knew my world was about to turn upside down. Dead men don't text, but my son had. I gripped the steering wheel as my headlights cut through the empty streets. It was just past midnight, and every shadow seemed alive, watching me. My hands shook, my breath shallow. The message burned in my mind. Dad, come to my house now. Was it a cruel prank? Some heartless scammer? Or was it really Richard? The thought made my chest tighten. I had seen his coffin. I had thrown dirt onto it. I had listened to the priest pronounce his life over. And yet, here I was, driving toward his house as if chasing a ghost. When I pulled up, the street was silent. His home, once so full of life and laughter, looked abandoned, its windows dark, the porch light dead. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. My gut twisted with fear. What if someone was waiting for me inside? Finally, I forced myself out. The night air bit into me. My shoes crunched against the gravel as I walked up the steps. I raised my hand to knock, but before I touched the door, it creaked open on its own. I froze. "Richard?" My voice cracked in the darkness. For a moment, nothing. Just the hollow silence of an empty house. Then, movement. A figure stepped into the faint spill of moonlight from the street lamp. Thin, pale, shoulders hunched. "Dad!" My knees nearly gave out. My son, stood in front of me, alive. His skin was drawn, his eyes tired, his frame weaker than I remembered. But it was him, Richard. I stumbled forward, grabbing him, clutching him like I would never let go again. My voice broke as I whispered, "Richard, how? How is this possible?" He leaned against me, his voice a hoarse whisper, each word strained. "Dad, I had to disappear." I pulled back to look at him, my hands gripping his shoulders. "Disappear? You faked your death?" He nodded weakly, his eyes glassy but sharp with fear. "It was the only way. They were going to kill me." The ground seemed to shift under me. "What are you talking about? Who?" Richard pressed a finger to his lips, and his body tense. "Not here, not loud. Come inside." We stepped into the house together. The air smelled stale, the curtains drawn, the living room cluttered with stacks of papers and empty water bottles. It wasn't the home I knew. It was a hideout. I sat him down on the couch, still trying to process what I was seeing. My son, dead to the world, sitting in front of me, alive. "Richard," I said, my voice trembling, "I buried you. I stood at your funeral. I gave your eulogy. What in God's name is going on?" He closed his eyes, leaning his head back as if gathering strength. Then slowly he opened them and looked at me. "Dad, I couldn't tell you. If I did, they'd watch you too. It wasn't safe." "Safe from who?" I pressed, my heart pounding. His jaw tightened. People with power. People who didn't want me alive. I shook my head, anger and relief colliding inside me. "And Olivia? She didn't even come to the funeral. She's in Cancun with Miguel, posting pictures, celebrating while I thought you were gone." At the mention of her name, Richard's face darkened. He turned away, his voice low, bitter. "I know." I leaned closer, desperate. "You know? Richard, she abandoned you. She humiliated me. She's out there laughing while we... My words choked. Richard's hand trembled as he gripped the armrest. He finally looked at me, his eyes burning with something deeper than pain. "Dad, Olivia knew everything." I stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" His voice broke, but his words were steady, sharp. "She knew about the plan. She knew I had to disappear. She promised she would wait for me. But instead she betrayed me. My breath left me in a rush. Betrayal layered over grief, thick and suffocating. Olivia hadn't just abandoned the funeral. She had chosen something far darker. I looked at my son, alive but wounded in ways I couldn't yet see. The anger I felt earlier in the day now twisted into something sharper, more dangerous. Because if Richard was alive, and Olivia had known, then her absence wasn't just selfish. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. I whispered the words, my voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "She betrayed you?" Richard nodded slowly, his face pale but his eyes blazing. And in that moment, I realized the coffin I had buried wasn't the only grave that day. My trust in Olivia had been buried too. She wasn't just absent, she was cashing in. I sat in Richard's dim living room, shadows stretching across the floor from the single lamp in the corner. His coffee table was buried in files, scattered notes, and half-empty bottles of medicine. The place looked more like a bunker than a home. My son sat hunched on the couch, thinner than I'd ever seen him, his hands trembling as he sifted through the papers. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Alive, but broken. "Richard," I said softly, "tell me the truth. All of it. Why did you have to fake your own death?" He hesitated, glancing toward the darkened window as if someone might be listening. His voice came low, cautious. "Because I wasn't just fighting for my job, Dad. I was fighting for my life." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached for a folder, slid it across the table to me. Inside were reports, charts, emails, proof of something far bigger than him. The company I worked for. They were running trials with drugs that weren't safe. They knew it. They hid it. And when I found out, I couldn't stay quiet. My stomach turned cold as I read the highlighted lines. Patients harmed, deaths covered up, millions of dollars at stake. I blew the whistle, Richard continued, his voice barely more than a whisper. And that's when everything changed. I started getting threats. My car was followed. I came home one night and the locks had been changed. I knew it was only a matter of time. I gripped the papers in my hand, fury rising. So you staged your death, he nodded weakly. Dr. Peterson helped me. You remember him? He used to come over for barbecues, played golf with you sometimes. He's been keeping me alive, hidden. He arranged the medical records, made it look real. Without him, I'd be dead for real. I stared at my son, the weight of his words crashing over me. My grief twisted into anger, not just at the company, not just at the enemies he'd made, but at the one person who should have stood by him. I asked the question I dreaded. And Olivia? Where was she in all this? Richard's jaw clenched, his eyes dark. She promised she'd wait. She knew the plan, Dad. She swore she'd keep quiet, keep the house, keep everything steady until it was safe for me to come back. He shook his head slowly, bitterness dripping from his voice. Instead, she planned my burial. The words cut deeper than any knife. He picked up another document from the pile, thrust it into my hands. It was an insurance payout statement, her name at the top, the amount clear, $750,000. My throat tightened. She took the money. Yes, Richard rasped. Within days of the funeral. She didn't just betray me, Dad. She cashed me out like I was nothing but an asset, and then she ran. My blood boiled, my hands shaking with rage. Images of Olivia on the beach with Miguel flashed in my mind, her glass raised in a toast to her new life. My son, hiding in shadows, barely clinging to health, while she drank champagne in the sun. She'll pay for this, I said through clenched teeth. Richard's eyes flicked up to mine, weary but searching. I don't just mean money, Dad. There's more. She'd been planning this for years. I frowned, leaning forward. What do you mean? He pushed a final stack of folders toward me. Medical notes, insurance application. Ends, documents with his name scribbled across them. But as I scanned them, my blood ran cold. They weren't Richard's handwriting. False records. Fabricated stories about his mental health. Claims of depression, instability, paranoia, all carefully planted, ready to be used against him. Richard's voice broke, raw with betrayal. She was building a case, Dad. A history that didn't exist, making me look unstable, dangerous. If I'd really died, it would all look natural. Tragic, but believable. She wanted everyone to think my death was inevitable. I dropped the papers, my fists clenched. Grief roared inside me, burning into fury. She hadn't just abandoned him, she had been plotting his downfall long before this. I looked at my son, my voice low but sharp. This wasn't just betrayal. This was murder in slow motion. The room went silent except for the ticking of an old clock. I stared down at the forged papers scattered across the floor, and a cold realization settled over me. Olivia hadn't just given up on Richard. She had wanted him gone. I thought Olivia was careless. Turns out, she was careful. Too careful. Richard's living room was no longer just a refuge. It had become a crime scene of paper and memory. Files were spread across the table, spilling onto the floor. Some pages were stained with coffee, others with the weight of his trembling hands. I crouched among them, combing through the wreckage of his hidden life. Every folder opened another wound. Bank slips, insurance policies, medical notes, all of them carrying Olivia's fingerprints in one way or another. Look at this, Richard rasped, sliding a thick envelope toward me. Inside were multiple insurance forms, all with his name, all signed, but I recognized instantly they weren't his signature. They were forgeries. She doubled the coverage, I muttered, scanning the figures. Not one policy, Richard. 3. She was setting up a jackpot. He leaned back, exhausted, his eyes hollow. She started filing them before I disappeared. She was betting on my death before the world believed it happened. My stomach twisted. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, layered, engineered for years. I moved to the next stack, Richard's so-called medical notes, diagnoses of paranoia, scribbles about his supposed suicidal thoughts, all of it fake, all of it designed to frame a story. Richard was unstable, self-destructive, destined to fall apart. She wanted them to believe I'd crack, Richard whispered. That my death would be tragic but expected. The pieces slid together like a puzzle I never wanted to see complete. And then came the phone. Richard unlocked an old device, the screen cracked but still functional. He handed it to me without a word. On it were voice recordings, muffled but clear enough. Olivia's voice, low and certain, speaking to Miguel. Freedom soon. Just a few more weeks. Once the payout clears, we'll never look back. Her words hit harder than any blow. I stared at the phone, bile rising in my throat. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was in on this from the start. Richard nodded faintly. She cashed me out, Dad. In every sense. The rage simmering inside me crystallized into focus. I gathered the papers, snapping photos with my phone. Insurance documents, fake notes, bank transfers, and the recordings, every one of them. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a blueprint for murder hidden in bureaucracy. But anger wasn't enough. We needed law. We needed leverage. I stepped outside onto the porch and made the call to the only man I trusted with something like this, Robert Daniels, an old family friend and a sharp attorney. He answered on the second ring. Daniels, it's me, I said, keeping my voice steady. I have documents, insurance fraud, forged medical records, recordings, enough to take Olivia apart. Silence, then a sharp inhale. You'd better not be exaggerating. I'm not. I emailed him the first wave of files. It took less than 5 minutes before his reply came through, his voice urgent, clipped when I called him back. This is enough to bury her, legally, Daniel said. I looked out into the night, gripping the phone tighter. No, I muttered. She buried herself. The words steadied me. For months I had been drowning in grief, gasping for answers. Now, with every page and recording, the tide turned. Fear gave way to empowerment. We weren't powerless anymore. We had evidence, a path forward, and something Olivia couldn't erase, truth. Inside, Richard was dozing, exhaustion overtaking him. I covered him with a blanket, then sat at the table, organizing everything into neat piles, photographing, duplicating, securing backups. If Olivia wanted shadows, we'd drag her into the light. Hours blurred into each other until the quiet of the room was broken. Not by Richard, not by the clock, but by a buzz on my phone. A new notification. I opened it and my blood froze. It was Olivia. On social media, smiling in the sun, Cancun, palm trees in the background. Miguel's arm around her shoulders, her face tilted up toward the camera, carefree, alive, triumphant. The caption read, "Never felt so alive." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles burned. She thought she was untouchable, drinking and laughing in paradise. But paradise has tides, and hers was about to turn. Every picture she posted was another nail in her coffin. I sat in Richard's dim living room, the glow of my phone the only light, scrolling through Olivia's parade of arrogance. Sun-drenched beaches, champagne glasses clinking, designer clothes in every frame. Miguel's arm always wrapped tight around her waist, his grin as smug as her own. They thought the world was thought, cheering them on, but I knew the truth. Each photo was evidence, each caption a confession. One post caught my eye. Olivia sprawled across a pool chair, her sunglasses reflecting the water. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Nothing sweeter than freedom and fresh starts." I zoomed in on her necklace, a gold chain I had given Richard on his college graduation. My throat tightened, my hands shook, but anger steadied me. "Hard work?" I muttered aloud. "No, Olivia. Theft, betrayal, blood money." Richard stirred on the couch behind me, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not even hiding it, Dad." "No," I said, tucking the blanket tighter around his frail body. "And that's what will end her." For weeks, Olivia's arrogance was my greatest ally. Every purchase she flaunted, every caption dripping with pride. It all painted a picture of a woman drunk on her own deceit. Miguel showed off too, posting a video with a brand new sports car, revving the engine like a boy with stolen toys. The license plate number was visible, sloppy, careless. The public loved it at first, comments full of envy and praise. But envy curdled quickly. Beneath the hearts and fire emojis, new voices emerged. Wasn't she just widowed? How does she afford all this? This feels wrong. People were beginning to see the cracks. Olivia was digging her own grave, one careless post at a time. I gathered everything, screenshots, timestamps, her smirking face against the backdrop of luxury. Then I met with Daniels, our lawyer, and an investigator named Harris, a man whose calm eyes hid the bite of a wolf. We spread the evidence across a conference table like a feast of poison. Bank statements, forged signatures, audio recordings, and now, Olivia's digital parade of guilt. Harris leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against one of the screenshots. This, he said, is exactly what we need. D, you've given us enough to freeze her accounts. The satisfaction that welled up in me was sharp, almost sweet. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. Freeze her smile, too. Daniels glanced at me but said nothing. He didn't need to. He knew what Olivia had taken wasn't just money. She had robbed us of dignity, of peace, of Richard's rightful life. Within days, the wheels turned. Notices were filed, accounts flagged, transfers halted. Olivia's stream of photos slowed, then stopped. The silence was louder than any post she could have made. Richard watched it unfold with quiet disbelief. She's really going to lose it all? She already has, I told him. She just doesn't know it yet. And then the inevitable happened. Olivia came home, not to mourn, not to repent. She came back because the money was gone. Because her paradise had crumbled the moment investigators clipped her wings. I was in my kitchen late one night when I got the alert, a local news headline flashing across my phone. Widow returns amid fraud investigation. The photo showed her at the airport. No designer dresses this time, no champagne in her hand, just a wrinkled hoodie, her hair pulled back, her face pale and drawn. Miguel was nowhere in sight. For the first time since Richard's so-called funeral, I felt something close to justice. But justice, I reminded myself, wasn't finished yet. She had returned broke, desperate, cornered. And when people like Olivia are cornered, that's when they're the most dangerous. Olivia walked back into America like a queen, only to be met by handcuffs. I saw it on the news first. Flashing cameras crowded the airport terminal as she stepped off the plane, her chin high, sunglasses covering most of her face. She still thought she could play the part of the untouchable widow. But the moment she cleared the gate, 2 federal agents stepped forward. The cuffs clicked around her wrists before she even had time to fake a tear. The cameras caught everything, her gasp, her stumble, the way she looked around for Miguel. But Miguel wasn't there. He had already fled, leaving her alone with the wreckage she had built. For a brief second, Olivia tried to turn it into theater. "This is a mistake," she shouted as reporters shoved microphones toward her. "I've been grieving. You don't understand." But the agents didn't flinch. They pulled her forward, past the flashing bulbs and the whispers of strangers. The next morning, I sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, my hands folded, my black suit pressed. Richard stayed hidden in the shadows of another life, but I carried him with me in every breath. When Olivia was led in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, the room buzzed. She looked smaller now. No designer clothes, no gold jewelry, no Miguel holding her hand. Just a beige jumpsuit and eyes darting like a cornered animal. The charges were read out one by one. Insurance fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. Each word was another stone piled on her shoulders. I expected her to stay silent. Instead, she stood and tried to turn the tide with her voice. "I was manipulated," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what I was signing. Miguel pressured me. He controlled everything. I was just lost." Her lawyer nodded solemnly, as if rehearsed. But the evidence we had gathered was too strong. The screenshots, the bank transfers, the forged medical notes, every page was another nail sealing her fate. The judge looked unimpressed. The jury whispered among themselves. And I just sat there, watching the woman who had nearly destroyed my son dig herself deeper. I remembered the poolside photos, the champagne, the smug captions. New beginnings. Freedom soon. No, I thought. This was the ending she had earned. At one point, Olivia's eyes found mine in the crowd. For the first time, her mask cracked. Her lips trembled, her gaze pleading, as if I might stand and defend her, as if I had forgotten the empty seat at Richard's funeral. My jaw tightened. I didn't move. Her voice rose again, shrill and desperate. "I loved my husband. I never wanted this." The words sliced through the courtroom, but I knew better, and when her eyes begged me one last time, I gave her nothing. Only silence. Inside, my final thought settled like stone. No, you manipulated yourself. The hearing dragged on, motions filed, objections raised. But the direction was clear. Olivia wasn't going home. Not now, not ever. When it was done and the gavel came down, I stepped out into the cool air. For the first time since Richard's supposed death, I felt the weight on my chest ease. Justice wasn't finished, but the wheel had turned. That night, back in Richard's hidden refuge, I told him everything. His face was pale but calmer than I had seen in months. He listened, his hands trembling slightly as he absorbed the news. "So she's really—" he began, his voice hoarse. "She's finished," I said. "The mask is gone. She'll pay for every lie, every betrayal." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad," he said, the faintest spark returning to his eyes. "I'm ready to come back." My son walked into the sunlight again, alive to the world, the hospitals. Press release called it an identity mix-up, a clerical error, a tragic confusion with another patient. That was the official story. But I knew the truth, that Richard had been forced into the shadows, and now, step by step, he was learning to live in the light again. The cameras flashed as he stepped through the hospital doors. He looked thinner, paler than most remembered him, but the smile on his face, tired, fragile, yet real, made the whispers in the crowd fade for me. Reporters shouted questions, strangers craned their necks, some skeptics muttering, "How could a hospital make a mistake like this?" But none of it mattered. My son was standing, breathing, alive. He paused by the steps, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the doubts, the weight of months gone by. I walked forward and pulled him into my arms. His ribs felt sharp under his suit, his body weak, but his heartbeat against my chest told me all I needed to know. Later, when the press had been pushed back and the world grew quieter, Richard and I sat together in the garden behind my house. The autumn sun cast gold across the grass. He turned to me, his eyes glistening. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said, his voice breaking, "but I didn't lose you." I gripped his hand firmly, "And I never will." He smiled then, a weary but genuine smile, and in that moment I felt something inside me mend. The days that followed weren't easy. There were whispers in the neighborhood, cautious stares from people at the market. Some believed the hospital's version, others whispered darker theories. I heard one neighbor mutter, "Strange how his widow ended up in prison, and now he's alive again." But I held my head high, let them whisper. The truth was ours, and we owed no one an explanation. Richard, despite his frailty, began to talk about the future. One evening, as we pored over coffee-stained notes on my kitchen table, he looked up with a spark in his eyes. "I can't go back to what I was," he said. "The company will never let me, but I have seen how corruption eats people alive, Dad. Maybe I can fight back another way." I frowned, curious. "How?" "A consulting firm," he said, leaning forward, energy returning to his voice, "helping smaller companies protect themselves, teaching them how to build with integrity. It won't just rebuild my life, it'll make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others." The idea lit something in both of us. It wasn't just work, it was redemption, a way to turn pain into purpose. We began sketching plans, calling old contacts we trusted, outlining steps one by one. Every late night we spent planning was another brick laid in the foundation of a new life. Sometimes I would catch Richard staring out the window, his hand resting on the glass. I knew what he was thinking, that he had almost lost all of this, that his rebirth came with scars that would never fully fade. But then he'd look back at me, determination in his face, and I'd know he was ready. On the morning we signed the papers to make it official, Richard squeezed my shoulder. "I buried my old life, Dad, but I'm still here, and I'm building something better." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I buried my illusions that day, not my son. And with that truth, we walked forward, into a future neither of us had dared to dream. I didn't just watch Olivia fall, I watched myself rise. For months, her shadow had stretched over every corner of my life. The lies, the betrayal, the humiliation I felt as I stood alone at Richard's funeral. It all had weighed on me like chains I couldn't break. But now, sitting in our small new office beside my son, those chains were gone. The place wasn't much to look at yet, a couple. Of desks, one working printer, a second-hand coffee maker that sputtered more than it poured. But to me, it felt like a cathedral, because inside these walls, we weren't just starting a business, we were starting over. Richard sat across from me, thinner, but steady, his pen scratching across a notepad filled with plans for our consulting firm. Every now and then, he'd stop to catch his breath, then push forward again. Watching him reminded me of when he was a boy at the dining table, working late into the night on school projects. Same determination, same spark. Only now that spark had been tested in fire. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't escape the ghosts. Some nights I'd still wake up and see the image of that empty chair at the funeral, the seat where Olivia should have been. My chest would tighten at the memory of people whispering, their eyes flicking between me and that glaring absence. I remembered the pity, the way it burned, and then I'd remember the pictures. Olivia and Miguel on the beach, smiling while I threw dirt onto what I thought was my son's coffin. Betrayal like that doesn't vanish overnight. It leaves scars. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the office bathed in amber light, I found myself staring out the window at the city skyline. The cars below moved like ants, people rushing home to families, to dinners, to ordinary peace. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Older now, harder maybe, but not broken. Richard must have sensed the heaviness in me. He set down his pen. "You're thinking about her again," he said softly. I sighed. "I'm thinking about what betrayal takes from a man. Not just money, not just trust, but dignity." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "She tried to bury me, Dad. She almost buried you too." I turned back to him, steady now. "She failed. And do you know why? Why? Because justice isn't about revenge. Revenge is fire. It burns hot, then leaves you empty. What we've built instead, that's restoration. That's dignity." He leaned forward, his eyes shining in the dim light. "Then let's keep building." We sat there for a while in silence, the weight of the past slowly giving way to the shape of the future. Our consulting firm wasn't just about income. It was about purpose. It was about using everything Richard had endured, everything we had uncovered, to help others avoid the same traps. I thought about Olivia then, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She had gambled everything on greed. She thought wealth could buy freedom, that lies could replace loyalty. In the end, she lost it all. And I realized something important. Family isn't defined by who marries in. Rings and vows can be broken. Paperwork can be forged. Family is who stands by you when the storms hit, who takes the blows with you and helps you back up again. I turned to Richard, my voice firm. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned, one choice at a time. His lips curved into a tired smile. "Then we'll earn it together." That night, as we closed the office and stepped into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The city hummed around us, alive and restless, but inside me there was quiet, peace. I didn't just survive betrayal, I rose above it. And standing beside my son, I knew this truth. I hadn't buried him at that funeral. I had buried my illusions. So now I turn to you, listening to my story. Betrayal comes for many of us, though in different forms. And when it does, it forces a choice. To stay broken or to rise stronger. Tell me, what would you have done if it were your family?